Shalom, everyone. It's Friday again, and this time it's Parashat Achrei Kedoshim. This week, I wanted to try something new. I'm actually going to share some half-baked thoughts and maybe explore them together with you and see if I get to any interesting conclusions, and I'll share them with you, and maybe I'll end up going absolutely nowhere. But nonetheless, I thought I wanted to maybe, ramble together with you, and maybe something interesting will come out of it. In our Parashat Achrei and Kedoshim, two parashiot, there's actually something in common. Both of them talk a lot about sexual morality. Specifically, all of the relations, the sexual relations that one is not allowed to have with family members. Incest and the like. And one of the phrases that keeps appearing is the phrase Gilui Erva, uncovering the erva. Now, erva doesn't have a good translation into English. Erva and books have been written on this. I recommend my father's book as well. Erva seems to be a mixture of the word shame or nakedness or private parts or genitalia or core or kind of self of self and deep personal, the most private of private elements of oneself. All of these are very much translations in a way of erva. It also has halachic ramifications, very often the parts of the body that are usually covered, again reflecting the element of privacy and the element of selfhood, things that should be kept covered. And Gilui Erva is the ultimate expression of the exposure of that is private. There's, Baruch Hashem, intimacy is supposed to be intimate. And once intimacy is no longer intimate, but rather it's open wide, it is broadcast out of the framework of intimacy that it should be kept in. It should be kept between a couple that is right for it. If it's suddenly the bonds of love between a husband and wife, between lovers, is suddenly expanded to family members that shouldn't be within that framework, whether it's parents or siblings or anything of the sort, that is a breaking of the code. That is a uncovering of that should be covered. And again, the phrase gilui means to expose or to uncover. Fascinatingly, the episode before in Achrei, in our parasha, that talks about Gilui Erva, uncovering of the Erva, talks about Kisui Hadam, talks about the covering of the blood. What am I referring to? If you kill a wild animal like a deer or something like that, you shecht it in the woods, and this is not a domesticated animal like a cow or a sheep, but rather a more wild kosher animal, like, as mentioned, deer. All sorts of different types of deer are kosher if they're done properly. Then you need to do kisui hadam. You need to cover the blood. And this is a very cryptic kind of ceremony in a way. We don't do this with regular animals as much. This is specifically for an element of nature, the wild. There needs to be a certain blood returning back to the soil, and this kind of reminds me a bit of like the Hollywood, the Native Americans doing their special ceremonies of keeping the balance of nature. So, what is the connection between Gilui Erva, the uncovering of that is private, and the Kisui Hadam? So my brain went a-braining, and I realized that we do find a place where there was Kisui Erva in the Tanakh. If we look to Noach, to the very beginning of the Tanakh, we find that Noach, after surviving the Holocaust of the Mabul, of the flood, Noah is, as you could imagine, quite messed up. We see that he plants a vineyard, and he gets drunk, and he uncovers himself in his tent. Basically, again, this element of turning everything upside down. Et ervat aviv. And Noach's erva, his nakedness, his shame, his privacy, was exposed. Vayagid Shnei Echav b'chutz, and he told his brothers, Vayikach Shem v'Yefet et hasimla, and his brothers Shem and Yefet took the blanket, Vayasimu al Shem Shneim, Vayilchu acharonit, they walked backwards, Vayichasu et ervat avihem, upneihem acharonit, ve'ervat avihem lo ra'u. They covered up their father's erva, and they walked backwards, and they realized that in order to put things back to where it should be, Noach needed to be covered up once more. There's an element of uncovering, which is maybe an element of chaos, and there needs to be an element of covering, which is an element of order. Order and chaos, right? The yin and the yang, these two parts go very much together. How does the blood play into this? Well, Adam hu hanefesh. The Torah talks multiple times about blood being the source of the life force, the lifeblood of an animal. That is, in many ways, the thing that gives the animal animation, right? Blood is essential. Without blood, there's nothing left. Blood is the pulsing life within the animal, and we don't drink blood for that very reason, because that's something in many ways which is kind of sacred, some of taboo. To drink the life force of the animal, that should really go back into the ground. That should be returned. The life force needs to be returned back to the source of life, to the earth. This reminds me of Cain and Hevel. The blood shouting out from the earth. There's something deeply connected between Adam, Dam, and Adamah, right? Man, blood, and earth. There's something very deep there. Earth is the color of red, of Adam, of blood. There's something going on there. So we see that Kisui Adam is returning that life force to the earth, and Gilui, which is in many ways returning order from chaos, and Gilui Erva is turning chaos from order, right? There is something that should be covered and kept private, and that is then uncovered into the realm of chaos, Gilui Erva, which is, again, sexual immorality is always seen as the beginning of the end, of everything unraveling, of society not knowing what's up, what's down, who's whom, and everything kind of collapses, whether it's the flood, the Mabul, and so many other things. To take this one step further, there is a pasuk which seems to connect the two in our parasha. We see in our parasha that sleeping with a woman, being intimate with a woman when she's menstruating, is also taboo. Ve'ish asher yishkav et isha dava vegila et ervata. If you uncover her erva, et mekora hera, you have uncovered, you have exposed her source. Vehi gilta et mekor damea, and she has exposed her source of blood. Now, this appears also before when she has a baby. When a woman has a baby, we see in Tazria, when she brings the korban ve'ikrivo lifnei Hashem with korban yoledet vechiper alea v'tahara mimekor damea. Zot Torah hayoledet lazachar nekeva. Again, this idea of birth, of the idea of menstruation, the blood, the source being this kind of, in many ways, spring of life, Hadam hu hanefesh, that lives at the very center of things. And this term makor appears for the first time in the Tanakh in these two cases. And I looked, where else does the word makor, source, appear in the rest of the Tanakh? Now, we know we use the term source all the time in our day-to-day lives. Daf mekorot, right? A source sheet, right? These are things of referring to places in the text, but the word source at its source is a phrase from water, a water source. And indeed, throughout the rest of the Tanakh, every single time makor appears, makor chayim, makor maim chayim, it's always referring to a source of water. And here it's a source of blood. So we have a lot of different points here on the board, like one of those detective movies with lots of different red strings pointing different things. We have erva, the womb, the privacy, the source of life. We have blood, which is the life force. We have water, maim chayim, which is also a life force. Blood and water very often are woven together in the Bet Mikdash, the same place where the blood is poured down, the water is poured down. I mean, the wine is also poured down, but there's an element of blood and water together in the same kind of going down to the Even HaShtiyah, this idea of channeling down to the very source of existence under the Mizbeach, under the Kodesh Kedoshim. So there's something deep going on here. And again, I mentioned at the beginning, these are ramblings of a madman, but I think maybe if we try and tie it all together, even maybe going back to Noach with Niftechu Maya, not Tehom Rabbah, right? The sources of earth, life, the blood, the waters spewed forth, and we need to put them back. Let's summarize everything and try and make it succinct. There's chaos and there's order, to quote one of my teachers, Jordan Peterson. There's chaos and there's order, and we find that chaos stems from the source of life. There is something deeply primeval about chaos. The idea of Ruach Elohim merachefet al pnei hamayim. There's this idea of tehom, of chaos that needs to proceed before order. But in order to survive in our society, in our world, we need to give that chaos a structure. There is a makor dameh. There is a source of water which is chaotic, which, if it explodes, can either bring life or death or both. And that needs to be contained in a structure of order. We can't have only order and we can't have only chaos. We need a balance of the two. But I think this parasha, both referring to the covering of the blood, the structure, the returning of the chaos back to the order, the gilui erva being taboo, trying to cover the erva, bring the structure back into place to contain that chaos which is the source of life, which could potentially bring destruction if it's too much life, like the mabul, waters overflowing, overpowering existence. If we are able to do that, I think we will live a life of makor mayim chaim. We will be able to channel the powers that be of blood, of water, of humankind, of energy, of life, and Be'ezrat Hashem only bring forth new life, and not chas v'chalila, a destruction or a distortation of life. Shabbat Shalom.